Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Awaken Together podcast. I am Jen, and today we have a special guest that I am so excited for. Lexi is an astrologer that shares a very similar background to me. We have had these beautiful heart-to-hearts on TikTok lives and just become really friends through social media. And it's been so beautiful to watch her shine as she grows her own business. And I'm so excited for her to share some insight with us on her journey of going from a deep religion background into this kind of more freedom and spirituality and really turning to the stars for additional guidance. I can astrology nerd out all day long, as you know. So with that, welcome our astrologer guest, Lexi Wilson, another Wilson. Hello.
Hello, everyone. And yes, Wilson's in the house.
It's great. It's so great. That was like our first clicking point. We're like, we feel good. We got this.
Exactly. Like I can trust her.
Yes, yes, I love that. Awesome. Well, I'm so happy to have you here. And I want to say that I've absolutely loved your content along the way. I feel like we've been each other's hype people, and I've loved that.
Oh
So
my goodness. Yes, because your content, girl, oh my word. Every single time you post something, it's literally like when I'm sitting incorrectly or when I'm complaining about like back pain. And then I'll see something like literally I'm scrolling and you'll be like, you're supposed to sit like this. And I'm like, oh, damn, she got me.
honestly, to link it to astrology, it's my Virgo rising with a Virgo Jupiter. I can't help myself. I'm
That's what
like,
it is.
I'm obsessed. I'm
It really
obsessed
is.
with mind and body, correcting the body, feeling into the
Yes.
body, helping others with the body.
That makes so
Totally,
much sense.
totally on brand, you know?
Yeah. That definitely is on brand.
Well, I appreciate the love. And yeah, to start us off in this conversation, I would love for you to share with everyone. We have had episodes on really a lot of religion trauma and trauma in general, but I know that you so share a similar journey to me. And I know how many levels and how much work all of the undoing of really toxic like upbringing takes. But I love for you to just kind of share how you started this life and then kind of your shift into getting out of it. And then we can kind of dive into how astrology fell into that too.
And you know what's so funny? Because right before we started recording, we were talking and we were just talking a little bit about the Saturn return. And
Mhm.
interestingly enough, now that I think about it, it's like, well, the Saturn return and astrology, not that I knew at the time, but now that was so astrology really was like the thing that transitioned me out of being inside of a very fundamental closed religion into who I am today. It was the Saturn return.
Wow.
So we'll come back to that. But I
Mhm.
just found that to be interesting that obviously there's no coincidences that we were
Never.
talking about that, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So, yeah, but basically, I grew up in a religion that was very, very controlled. We were told exactly what to wear, how to, what we could eat. I wasn't allowed to wear jewelry or eat like seafood, like shrimp or pork. I was strongly encouraged. There are some sects within the religion that were required women to only wear dresses, and men can wear pants. So I was strongly encouraged to really wear very plain clothes and mostly stick to dresses, but I wore pants occasionally because my parents allowed me to. But a lot of my whole life was just really controlled. And I
Mm.
was homeschooled. So even inside of my education, I did go to public school when I was younger, but around sixth grade, my parents homeschooled me until college, which really controlled how I viewed the world and what I was allowed to do and who I was even allowed to be friends with. And so, because of this religion, I was in church probably a good four times a week for prayer meetings, youth meetings, um, and just any events that we had alongside every weekend. We would actually meet on Saturdays instead of Sundays. And so we would also meet for usually for Friday nights to bring in the Sabbath, which is what we are observing. That's what they called it, from Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. And because of that, during that time, that whole 24-hour period, we were discouraged from interacting with anything that was from the world, which would be
Mm.
secular music, movies, TV shows, everything, all of that needed to be pushed aside so we could focus our entire time on resting
Wow.
and communing with God. Yeah. And
Can
so it was
you believe, Lexi, my husband didn't even know what secular meant, like, just as a
wow.
side note, like,
Oh
I'm
my
realizing
goodness.
I have this language that, like,
Oh yeah, it's called, my friends and I call it Christianese.
oh,
There
man.
is there is an entire language, and it's so crazy because I didn't realize it was a language until you're in the world.
Yeah, you
That's
go
when
to
you
talk
realize.
about it and you're like, "Wait, you don't know what I'm saying?" Like, "What?"
Right. Exactly. Because it's so part, especially if you are so closed, you don't
Mhm.
talk to other people who don't get Christianese. So you don't know that you're speaking an entirely different language until
Literally.
you meet someone else and they're like, "What is secular?" And you're like, "What?" You
Yeah.
know? And so yeah, so that was my whole life, was just constantly in devout to the church, and it controlled everything, especially as you can imagine as a girl, it controls you on a whole different
Mhm. Mhm.
level, because of the fact that it means that I'm not allowed to be a pastor or to be an elder. I can't hold leadership roles. I have to control my the way that men see me. So I have to
Mhm.
dress in a certain way because I'm responsible for them. And I know I don't want to be a Jezebel, as they would call it, where
Mhm.
you're causing men to sin.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the way that I was raised, and I hated it. I hated it. I was third generation inside of this religion, which means that my grandmother joined when she was a little girl. She raised my mom in it and all her children in it. And then my mom raised me in it. And it was, I had a lot of great experiences, but at the same time, I've had a lot of trauma, just
Mhm.
like many other people who grow up in this sort of thing, because so much of your identity has to be hidden or denied or shamed, which is
Mhm.
the worst ever emotion that any of us could ever experience, is that shame and that guilt
Mhm.
that comes along with that, because it permeates through everything else in your life. And
Yeah.
so that was sort of what I dealt with. And when I hit my 20s, I had went to a college that was also part of my religion. So I was still in the church and still in all these things. And they, even in college, you had a curfew. You could only do certain things and dress certain things. You weren't allowed to wear jewelry in school. So it was still very, very controlling. And once I graduated, is when I first, for the first time, got to live by myself. I didn't have like roommates that were also in the religion, and I didn't have RAs. I was an RA, so sorry to everyone that I had to tell the rules to. But I didn't have that control anymore. So it gave me permission to start to ask questions and take actions that I couldn't take before.
Mm.
And so that, being able to live on my own, I was still, when I graduated, I was still in the city of the people that I went to college with. So that city was very much like, we own that town, that religion like owns that town. So you still couldn't do too much because everyone there is part of the religion. But at least by being home and not having roommates and not having anyone controlling what I was doing, it gave me permission to start to read different types of books or watch different types of YouTube, because in college, a lot of our stuff was banned. So I
Yeah.
couldn't just go onto YouTube, which at the time YouTube was just beginning. So it was very new,
Yeah.
but like I couldn't go and search different kind of websites because they would be banned. But once I moved off campus and graduated, I could go to anywhere on the internet. And that opened up a lot of doors, which started to give me this permission to explore spirituality.
Mm.
And although I was terrified, so it took me a lot of years to actually decide to engage with it, I could at least like sort of look at it, the new age thing, and just kind of look at it. But I wasn't like, "Oh, I'm going to bring cards home, or I'm going to
Yeah.
go get crystals." Like I
You're
was like,
waiting to see if Satan's gonna take you down and
exactly. Right. Because
yeah.
that's what you're raised to believe. I
Yeah.
was raised to believe that literally jewelry, okay, this is why we didn't wear jewelry, because the idea is you're not supposed to have any other idols before God. And so if you wear jewelry, then what you're doing is you're putting something like adornment over what God has made you already look like. Like God has made you perfect. Why do you need to adorn yourself with these jewels? And if you do, it suggests that it's because you are placing your view of beauty over God's view of your beauty. In
Mhm.
addition to the fact that when you are holding these crystals or these jewelry, what you're doing is you're putting this energy, or you're letting that energy come into you, and it becomes a gateway at which Satan can confuse you
Oh my
and
goodness.
control you. Right. I know. So
Mm.
this is why it's like, oh, well, now this makes a lot of sense why we weren't allowed to wear jewelry, because they likened it to crystals and to all these different things on top of things. Like you couldn't pierce your body, you couldn't do
Yeah.
tattoos, because of course the Bible also discourages that.
Yep.
And of
Yep.
course the Bible also discourages against, witchcraft and like
Oh
all
yeah.
these things, right? So if you're playing around with cards and things like that, like, oh my goodness, girl. So I had a lot of internal fear that I couldn't really get over
Yeah.
necessarily. But the way in which I was starting to do that was by one, kind of, Googling a little bit and seeing like, what is new age? Like, because that's what I used to find the term at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, but then outside of that, my life, I just hit the real world. Now I was working a real world job. I was working in social work, and social work it's definitely real world. And coming from such a naive place, it was an abrupt change. Now I dealt with a lot of abuse in my own childhood, but I didn't see it that way because it's part of the religion, it's part of the
Yeah.
culture, right?
Yeah.
So
Respect your parents. Don't, yeah,
right,
don't second
right.
guess. Yeah.
So I didn't second guess it. I just thought this is part of it. So when I saw it in social work, I saw the problem, but I didn't see how it was actually very much my life as well.
Yeah.
But by going through that, it did give me permission to recognize, like, man, there's a whole different world out here. And a lot of these people that I'm meeting in like my coworkers and things like that, I've been taught to think that they were like twisted minded
Yeah.
and bad people, like
And they
that
were gonna trick
everybody.
you and pull you
Yeah.
away. And yeah.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
now here I'm here and I'm like, no, these people seem really nice. Like they seem normal. They seem cool. So all of those little seeds started planting permission to have doubt in me. And so that gave me this courage to step into like, okay, well, if they were wrong about the world, what else might they be wrong about? And then that's when technically I get to, I'm fast forwarding so much, but get
Hmm.
to my Saturn return. Around 28, I really started to struggle with the idea of going to church.
Yeah.
And there was this documentary that somebody in our church decided to make, and it was about gay people inside of the church, and they were sharing their story. And the point of the documentary was basically to humanize gay people, because part of my religion as well was talking about how homosexuality is a sin.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, here I went to go watch the documentary, even though many people in the church were like, this is an abomination. Why are we like, why was this created? And I loved it. And I got so angry at the fact that these people are being treated so differently because of who they are. Like it's just
Yeah.
who they are. And little did I know that I was bisexual. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew, but I
Yeah.
did not know for sure. But I was so angry. And then especially because I had also found out that inside of my church, um, years back, they had a very racist stance against Black people.
Wow.
And yet obviously they were wrong. And they later on kind of mysteriously have removed
You
some
can
of these
see that they
teachings.
cover their tracks,
Right, they
It's
cover
like,
their
yeah.
tracks.
Yeah.
And so at the time I thought, now I'm a Black person, just in case you guys don't know, but at the time I thought, okay, so if they were wrong about what they believe was their role in tackling civil rights and racism, could they be wrong about homosexuality?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why are they not willing to ask that question
Yeah.
when they were also wrong about racism? So that was kind of like something that I was constantly bringing up in church, which of course was
They
like,
don't like a questioner.
they don't like a questioner. And
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about, are you trying to get us to a point of saying that we're wrong about homosexuality. And you're
Mhm.
also trying to get us to admit that at one point we were also holding racist ideology as well. Like you gotta be kidding me, you know? So like
Mhm.
it created a lot of tension between me and elders in the church all the time, which was good because it started making me uncomfortable with going to church. So by me feeling that discomfort, it gave me permission to then stop going. And around that time of 28 was when my life started to just fall apart and I didn't know why. Everything was just going wrong. My job was horrible and that was turning into something that was horrible. My perception of reality and spirituality was shifting. I felt like I just felt horrible. And at one point I basically was like, listen, if Jesus knows my heart and I end up getting to like the end of the line and Jesus comes the second coming and then he looks at my heart and he recognizes that I wasn't a good little religious girl, I'm going to go to hell anyway.
Mhm.
So I might as well just go all the way.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
that was my perspective that I was like, because if Jesus reads my heart, it doesn't matter how I act. Everyone else is going to think I'm a Christian, but Jesus is going to come back and he's going to see that I'm not.
Yep.
So I've just got to go and do my thing. And so essentially at that age time is when I started to really allow myself to explore like what is this. And at the time Periscope was around. And
Mhm.
so there was this girl that would sometimes do card readings, and because I was too afraid to bring cards into my
Uh-huh.
house.
Uh-huh. I feel so much truth in your
You
story.
know what I mean?
Yes,
I
keep
was
going.
so afraid that I
Uh-huh.
was like, okay, I won't buy cards, but I'm just gonna tune into this Periscope girl.
Uh-huh.
What she has to say. And every time that she would go live, she was always right about where I was and what I was experiencing. And so that was kind of the beginning of my spiritual awakening. It wasn't pretty at all, but that is the long but short story of how I kind of got here.
Oh my God. Like
Yeah.
so much. Like you said it so well. And yeah, like it's so crazy how you have to kind of take the logic from where you're at and walk your way to different stuff. Like I think it's
Mhm.
very funny for people outside of it to know like unless you were in it, it's kind of hard to feel like how you have to talk yourself into things in this really backwards way to like, do it. And it seems like kind of ridiculous, but it comes in so many layers because when you're
Right.
taught from a really young age that every single thing is out to trick you, it's so
Mhm.
hard to trust like so many things, including
Right.
your own emotional needs, which just like the layers of
Right.
that keep coming. You just feel so wrong for feeling so many things that you eventually lose your compass for even
Yeah.
knowing what you're feeling and why. You get so used to having like this service mind and
Yeah.
yeah, and I remember like my first like early steps, like it felt so selfish and it felt yeah, there was just so much confusion on self-love and yeah, being of the self and how to like,
Yeah.
there was just so many layers
Well, because
and
I don't know about you, but like
yeah.
I know in my religion, we had that Bible verse that was like, lean not on your own
Yeah.
understanding, in
Yeah.
all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path, which I cannot
Mhm.
believe that I actually remembered
Oh, I
that
got
word
him
for word.
down, Lexi.
Yeah,
It's
this is crazy. But because of that belief, that is
yeah.
part of why we were also trained to not trust our own inner feelings,
Yeah.
because you're taught from childhood that your natural disposition is to walk towards sin.
Yeah.
So if you're taught that we are all born sinners and thus born to do the wrong thing, and that the way out of sin and into salvation is one, to believe that Jesus Christ died for you, and two, to live your life in honor of him. Now you can't trust yourself because
Yeah.
you've been taught your whole life that your heart is sinful. So you
Yep.
have to lean on God, on Jesus. And so that's part of what makes transitioning out of this so difficult, is because you are trying to do something that is you have literally been taught is bad, is going to send you to
Yeah.
hellfire. That is where so much of the trauma really comes from, because if you know that that what that even the asking of the question,
Yeah.
is going to lead you there. And I also know that in my religion, a lot of times the way that we understood Satan's role in this
Yeah, he can
is
be
that
just like light, and so you don't even know how to trust anything because 'cause you're like, "Oh,
right.
no, what if this is a disguise?" Like,
Right. What if it's a
the whole
disguise?
yeah,
And
yeah.
for me, with the way that they raised me was like the way that this started was Satan was starting to ask questions.
Mhm.
That was how they framed it to me, that if you're asking all these questions, you need to be careful because Lucifer asked a lot of questions and look at where it landed him.
Yeah.
And so when you're likening me to the worst possible thing ever, that
Yeah.
it makes it very difficult then to trust yourself, because you're going, okay, so I'm born a sinner, my natural disposition is to sin. If I ask too many questions, it means that I'm just like the ultimate sinner. Come
Mhm.
on now. So now am I going to leave? No. On top of, if I do leave, that means that I might risk losing my parents, my friends. Because if you're really like the way that I was raised, where your whole world is in the church,
Oh,
so you're not going
you'll
to,
get cut off. You'll get cut off,
yeah, you'll
Yeah.
get cut off, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like why they have to, like, my best friend completely blocked me, cut me off and everything once she realized that I had left. And the reason why she did that, which I understand because I understand the
Yeah.
religion,
That's the
the
sad part. You
reason,
get the logic,
right,
Yeah.
right. And the reason why you do that is, one, she's a parent now. And so in her mind, she was like, I don't want to expose my children to whatever sin you'll bring into their
Mm.
life as a result of our friendship.
Yeah.
Two, I don't want my children to be influenced to behave the way that you're behaving as a result of our friendship. And three, I also don't want to be influenced or tempted to
Mm.
go against God's word because of our friendship. So even though it's not in my faith, it's not that it's encouraged, like, like with Scientologists, they straight up say like you have to shun them. The church doesn't say that, but they do the same thing. There's just no word for it like there is in Scientology.
Yeah.
But they do the same exact thing, in the essence that the only real relationship that we can have at this point is if I am willing to explore the religion again with you all, and then it's up to you to witness to me, which is a
Yeah.
huge part of my religion as well, was
Yep.
the witnessing aspect. So
Yep.
it is very hard. And I feel like for people who don't come from that background, and even the people who do come from that background, they can't understand why it's so difficult to unravel. But it's because of all that's why it's difficult to just leave, because you're not talking about a regular church where you just go once a week and that's it, which that can even be really difficult too sometimes. But if
Yeah.
you are somebody who you were going to church multiple times and the religion permeated your entire life, and not just the one day a week that you're expected to go, then you can expect that this process is going to take years and years and years to deconstruct from.
Yeah. Yep. No,
Yeah.
so well said. And yeah, I think for my family and stuff too, as more came out, they believe that this existence is a test. It's a test to see how
Mm,
much devotion you will have. So
yeah.
anytime I am off, I'm so off track to my family and that
Mhm.
I'm like so in this dark, like being so manipulated by evil. And they truly have felt that way. I remember I started yoga and all the stuff my mom said and sent me and that, and like, just
Mm.
the layers, but it's all because they don't even see the relationship to you as like a daughter
No.
as being above what the relationship in this existence is, which is all a test to see if you'll continue to be devoted to God, which unfortunately is tied into so many of this religion dogma, which, as you brought up, and that was huge for me too. Like reading books and taking in documentaries and information, like
Mm.
was so helpful to start to
Yeah.
like get the picture of it. But when you look at the history, the church has changed so much of the little things that they like stand behind and why they use the same
Right.
Bible verses to
Right.
yeah, really promote racism, and then that's
Yeah.
all kind of been washed out, and now they're doing the same exact thing. And if you look at the layers on how they've kept people small, and you
Mhm.
really start to notice like the hatred that's tied into so many things and how it's so conditional and not
Yeah.
really this this love that it's, it doesn't match what they're saying, as
It
there's so much
doesn't.
that does not when you realize it. And
Right.
yeah. Mhm.
Exactly. No, it totally doesn't match. And that's what's so interesting is that a lot of times, you want to talk about God as love and Jesus is love in particular, but then at the same time, in the same breath, you're using these verses to discredit people's natural nature or
Mhm.
to support, which is so interesting because, I really one of the things that really kind of helped me to start to really reassess everything is being a Black person.
Yeah.
That really helped because in at least in terms of American slavery, slavery was condoned from a biblical sense. There
Mhm.
was a lot of
Absolutely.
yeah, there were a
Yeah.
lot of slave masters who were literally like, this is what the Bible says about you. And they would take the verses that were referencing slavery, but obviously not talking about this. They would reference it and then say, well, that's why you're supposed to be enslaved.
Yep.
That's why you're this. And I'm really just doing God's work. So I always find it interesting when I'm talking to people of color, especially where I'm like, do you guys know like the real history
Uh-huh.
behind this? Because that's the real truth behind that. And so that's what's like you twisted that to support really your like this was about economics. This was
Yeah.
about money. It had nothing to do with anything else. But you wanted the same thing with missionary work, where it's like you go off to these islands, you go off to these countries and continents, and you say that you're going there to bring the gospel. But then ultimately, no, you were really there to conquer the land and
And you
get whatever
disrespect their
resources.
culture.
Right. And disrespect their culture, villainize their culture,
Mhm.
demonize their culture, make their culture illegal on their own lands. What?
Mhm.
Like this is crazy. And you used religion, not God, not the like spirit. You use religion, which is totally man-made, to then put people into these boxes, which ultimately was really about your economic gain.
Yep.
And so that's where it's like we really have to look at the truth behind these spaces where how did they really affect, because now you can even see it today. I love that you kind of brought that up because when times change, you'll notice that all of a sudden the religions change. So at one point, when you're talking about racism, here it was supported by various Christian churches who had these beliefs about why they needed to do what they were doing. Okay. Well, now, I just saw in the news recently about I think it was the Catholic Church mentioning something about trying to change certain things in the Bible or just change the phrasing of it so it would be more inclusive.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because although like that doesn't sound bad, what I find interesting is that it's like, yes, but you see how it
Mhm.
changes the context of the Bible and it changes the context of the meaning behind all of this stuff.
Yeah, at
So
what point are we not gonna, like, fully redefine and just let it break down?
exactly,
Like,
right. Because if you're
goodness.
willing to change it, then that tells me if you're willing to change it based off of culture, then how holy and reverent is this? Or is it really based off of the culture and what's happening in the time? Which to me makes a lot more sense. That it's like, no, it is when you're trying to take over people, you turn it into this. When
Yeah.
you're trying to eliminate certain cultures, you turn it into that. When you're trying to make something more welcoming, you turn it into this. I mean, people don't want to get into the reality behind Christmas. Okay. You don't want to know. And
Mhm. Yeah, it's all
like,
rooted in
let's,
privilege and so much of it's just tied in, and I think
it's
what you
tied
said is
in.
so important. I remember having this moment of looking at, like, the women's right movement and how much the church got involved in that, like, to try to, like, slow it down. Anytime
Yes.
expansiveness tries to happen, what ends up boxing it back in is usually a huge push of religion stuff. You can look
Right.
at the drug movement when all of the
Yes.
psychedelic research came. The church shut that down. Every
Right.
single time something goes to make us bigger and into more freedom,
They pull us back
it's
in.
a threat, and it's a threat of power and privilege, and it
Right.
always stomps back. And
Right.
yeah, and even spirituality, this giant spiritual movement,
Right.
I feel like we have to have so many conversations about that not ending up mirroring in a lot of ways some of the same shit. We have
Oh,
to be
yeah.
careful. But I
Yeah, we
think
do.
in spirituality, like there is at its root, it's supposed to be this craving for freedom. And it's not that there isn't a lot, there is hints of truth that lied in so much, but we have to
Yeah.
get real on the history behind this stuff. And once I
Right.
did, it took so much of that fear out of me stepping in. Cause, like you said, every single thing that came onto my path in spiritual, I thought I was playing with something so dark and that I shouldn't be messing with it. And I would like dip my toe in and then see like, is my life getting worse? Is evil
Right.
happening? Am
Right.
I like, is anything falling apart? And then if something bad happened,
Yeah.
I immediately would crawl back into the comfort and I was
Same.
so scared. And I was like,
Same.
oh, maybe something bad happened because I actually am supposed to be boxed in again. And then I
Right.
think when you look at how many people have been completely exploited by this system and you really see it from more of a advocating for
Yeah.
freedom for all and you really look at it in that way,
Yeah.
you realize that when you're behind the line of a lot of that strict religion, you're
Mhm.
also in the support system for so much like just straight abuse and
Yeah.
hatred and pain. And you
Right.
either need to get really loud on
Yeah.
how you are distinguishing the difference, or you need to really get real and look around and see what you're silently encouraging. And
Right, and
yeah,
silently supporting,
yeah,
because you're so right about that. That's the interesting thing too, because even though, I know people mean well, at the end of the day, in totality, like when you're talking about religions like this, religion is man-made. It really is. It's
yeah,
a set of beliefs that are created by groups of people in order for us to work together to meet some sort of agenda or some sort of mission that we are saying we align with. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's God leading the journey. That
yeah.
could be just man made. And that's where religion really is. And the further you get away from the center of where that religion started, the wackier and crazier it starts to become.
Yeah,
All of a sudden, all these rules start to change. And again, when you also add in cultural shifts, when things change in the culture, that can often be reflected inside of the religion. And that's what we're watching in some places where all of a sudden they want to be more inclusive and they want to be this and they want to be that, which sounds very good,
they
but
don't
it
wanna lose
also
their money,
but
their
they don't want to lose
congregation.
their money. And
Yeah,
it demeans
yeah,
the validity of the power with which you're saying that you have by having this holy test or holy testament, holy books. If you're able to change them so frequently based off of what's happening, then how can you also use that same thing to continue to enslave the minds of everyone who joins or believes? That's why, I made the comment about Christmas, because ultimately Christmas was and still is a very much pagan holiday. It is
mm,
part of a culture, and it's multiple cultures actually, because it's really about the winter solstice, and that is across many different cultures. They call it all different kinds of names depending on which continent you're in when they're talking about it. But it is this celebration of going into this winter. But
yeah,
because the church at the time was beginning to lose interest, and lose control, they figured, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll start to connect the religious practices of the pagans with the Christian ideology of Jesus's birth. Even though historically it's been stated that Jesus was probably born closer to fall, probably
mhm,
closer to October, but yet they connected the two in order to connect the culture. So people don't know that, which I'm sure over time, just like they're trying to also change some things now, probably hundreds of years from now, if we're still here, but it's like hundreds of years from now, there might
yeah,
be confusion on what the Bible actually said at a certain time because it's changing. This
yeah,
is why it's like when you know that, it starts to change. When you apply it to your personal life, you start to go, okay, well, if they're willing to change these things, now that I'm understanding the history and the timing of this stuff, am I allowed to change how I also feel about how this is the role that this is playing in my life? Because they're saying that I can't make certain choices based off of, well, the Bible verse says this. the elder says that, blah, 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 blah. So now I'm not allowed to wear, pants. I'm not allowed to pierce my ears. I'm not allowed to do this. But yet, depending on when I'm born, that whole section or that whole verse may one day be completely eradicated.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
is it can I live in that freedom now? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. But that is something that it's very difficult to ask yourself that question if you don't first establish that self-awareness that you are allowed to have your own thought and that your
Yeah.
own thought is not sinful just because it doesn't originate from a Bible verse.
Yeah.
You can't even get to that question until you first get to that self-awareness of like, oh, I'm allowed to be different. I'm allowed to have a difference of opinion from what I perceive to be the God of whatever church that
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yep. Oh,
Yeah.
so good. Yeah, I think Lexi to tie up the religion, and we'll talk about our journey into astrology too. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think the top line for me that like finally got me to stop being so scared of
Yeah.
so much stuff was realizing that fear
Mhm.
is the body's like system. It's your nervous system like screaming that something is wrong. High levels of fear
Mm.
like really cause dysfunction in the body. And I said, if this body is something
Yeah.
we're put in that we're supposed to have all this deep respect for,
Mhm.
why God wouldn't have us in all these fear cycles if that makes the
Yeah.
body work less. Like that doesn't make sense to me. And
Yes,
I like couldn't get past that question. Like,
that's such
why
a
would
good
we
thing to
be
say.
more scared in my
Right.
body when I know it shuts down my organs and makes me more sick? Why would
That's
that
so
doesn't
true.
work? It doesn't
Right.
add up.
And that is so true because you're so right about that. What a beautiful question to ask because
And they hated that one.
oh yeah, yeah, I'm sure they did because their whole thing is around fear.
Yeah.
Everything is fear. And the beautiful thing, it's so interesting because obviously we're taught when you're inside that the world is nothing but fear.
Yeah.
It's nothing but something to fear. And yet when you get outside, it's not to say that there aren't things to be afraid of, but at the same time, there's so much more love in
Yeah.
the real world, so much more love and so much more true
Yeah.
love, true expansion, um,
Unconditional love.
the unconditional love.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like it's just so crazy because it's hard because the way that you control the people is by keeping them in that fear state.
Yeah.
Fear is such an easy way to control all things, animals, people,
Yep.
all of it. Keep them in fear and you can make them do whatever you need them to do. And so when you can if you can get to that place of asking these types of questions to go, well, why would God want me to be in that space? If I know that that shuts things down for me,
Mm-hmm.
why would God want me to be there?
Yeah.
Just that simple question starts to give you permission to go, that doesn't align with who I understand God to be if you're telling me God is love.
Yeah.
Now, what makes this complicated is, for some of us, God is not love. Sometimes, for some of us growing up, God is nothing but vindication, or God is,
Yeah.
some. So that makes it also more complicated. But think about that. Even if you're being taught or raised, or were taught to see God as this angry, Old Testament God who, puts the whole world underwater and Noah's
Mm-hmm.
Ark, and like all these
Yeah.
then when you see it like that too, it can be scary to get to that space of like, okay, does God really love me? Because God doesn't feel like love to me. But I also want to implore you to recognize again, religion, God, and spirituality, all different things, all
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah.
And you are
Absolutely.
allowed to find out who God is to you and what spirituality means to you. That is your right as a human being or as a soul, rather, having a human experience.
Yeah.
That's what you're here for, is to explore who you are and what you believe. Maybe you don't believe in anything, and that brings you peace. That's beautiful. Allow
Mhm.
yourself the freedom to be in that space. Maybe you believe in everything, then that's beautiful too. Allow yourself to go out and believe in the trees and believe in the ocean and
Mhm.
believe in let yourself explore. But I understand that it is complicated And so that's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that in 2023, it's so much easier than I feel than even, 8 years ago, which is around the time I left the church around 8 years, well, 7 years ago. And I would definitely say that I'm like, it was so much harder than even just that time because I didn't have the vocabulary. So I didn't know even what to look for.
Yeah.
Now it's like look for, Instagram accounts that talk about spiritual deconstruction. Google these types of things because there's entire programs and entire coaches and fields in helping people to overcome the fear that comes with coming from inside of a either a cult or a very closed
Yeah.
religion,
Yeah.
so you can find that freedom and peace that
So
you
many
deserve.
resources and so many people that have shared their story. And I think as a
Yeah.
compass within spirituality, like looking at if an account is starting to sound a lot like it's that you need to be really fearful of the actions you're doing. I would challenge, looking at what that's doing, because I
Right.
think when it starts to get so detailed in what you have to do to get X, Y, and Z, it's
Yeah.
taking that curiosity and trust out of it. When I think, it's beautiful, because I think for so many of us, like sharing our stories, like I've had magic happen in my life and I believe in so much because of my own personal experiences. But I do think within that, there's still no guarantee that one formula will ever
Right.
fit all. And I
No.
think it's important, if something is making you have so much more fear and guilt,
Mhm.
question where that's coming from,
Yeah.
and see if it's coming maybe from poking wounds inside of yourself versus
Right.
if it's becoming, once again, I think we're rewriting a lot of what faith and surrender and trust and
Mhm.
curiosity looks like. And we're still right fresh off of the biggest, like, religion controlled environment, especially
Yeah.
here in the US. Like, it's
Yeah.
capitalism, religion. It's so much, it's tied in.
It's
Um,
tied in.
yeah,
Yeah, and the truth is, I love how you also had mentioned earlier about being mindful of even inside of the spiritual community,
yeah,
because you're absolutely right. I have definitely seen I mean, listen, there's corruption everywhere, and so there's no perfect place. And I've seen inside of, like, I'm a coach and I see inside of the coaching industry lots of corruption.
yeah,
I see people who are calling themselves coaches and they're really just scammers,
yeah,
and they don't
yeah,
care at all about your transformation. And so the same is true when you're definitely talking about spirituality, that if you're following an account and it is really honing in on this like fear based type of marketing or strategy or wording, and you start to recognize that vibration happening inside of your body every time that you're connecting with this person. And like Jen said, like, if it's not coming from a place of, well, this is about, fear of change or fear of
hmm,
healing and fear, the natural fear that we all get because we also have egos that are trying to
yeah,
protect us.
hmm,
If it's not coming from that place, but rather it's coming from this place, especially if it's coming from a place of like, I have all the answers, I am the guru, and you
hmm,
must join this and must come to my thing, and I will show you exactly how
hmm.
I did. That kind of languaging is no different than if you were inside of a religion who
You
was
have
trying
to be in
to.
religion to realize, like, it prompts the red flags. I think for us, it's one thing I'm
Yeah,
thankful for, but I worry
right.
for people stepping into it sometimes. Like,
Me
I see
too.
it and I can feel the familiarity sometimes, you know?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that you're so right. Like, that's the
Yes.
good thing about coming from that background and getting out, is that we do recognize it pretty quickly when we're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, hold on, this guru seems a little bit
Yeah.
off," and
It's
it's
treading
because we
close.
know
It's
that.
treading close.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that's where it's like, be mindful if you've never had this experience and you're really just listening out of curiosity or maybe to understand someone in your life, be mindful of even the spiritualists out there who also have that kind of similar approach, because there are so many people who, and sometimes they start off good, but they turn and their ego gets involved. And that's ultimately what this is. I feel like a lot of times even with religion, there's so many religions who probably genuinely started out truly good, truly with the intention of creating a space of peace for people, a space of understanding. But over time, or maybe not,
Yeah.
it turned into something egoic. And that
It's
can
hard
happen
to
very much. It
denounce your power and continue to humble yourself as you
right.
grow. It's
As
hard.
you grow.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
hard. And that's where it's like sometimes that happens when you get people together. And so, even inside of the spiritual community, you have to be mindful. And especially now when the internet makes it so accessible for us to speak our truth, which is beautiful because it makes space for people like me and Jen to come together and share our stories and connect with
Mhm.
others like us. But it also means that there are people out there who will use these same words and manipulate you into losing control of yourself so that way they can gain something from you, whether it's control of you, whether it's control of your resources. Like
Yeah.
people definitely will use spirituality to also control, just like they do with religion too. So it really comes down to staying, I feel, in touch with your intuition.
Yeah.
That's why your intuition is so important, and finding that thing that brings you back. And I know, like we were talking about with astrology, for me, that is astrology. For
Mhm.
me, astrology keeps me grounded in my intuition and my sense of like connection to spirit. I
Yep.
connect through the stars, and I've always connected through the stars. I just didn't, I wasn't allowed to own that, so I didn't. But
Yeah.
the older I've gotten and the more that I've walked away from being controlled, the more I have become open about what really grounds me and how I stay in my power. And I think that's why it's so important for everyone to find what is your truth. Because if not, you will fall for anything that's out
Mhm.
there that will give you an idea or an inkling of hope. And that's only because you haven't sought out the hope yourself. You're
Yeah.
seeking it out now in some person's doctrine, or some person who says that I have gone to the mountain and now I know all the things, like,
Yeah.
no, you go to the damn mountain.
Yeah, yep, yep. And you're not looking for absolute and answers. I think it's really important to
Yeah.
remember that the journey of looking into all this stuff and just hearing perspective doesn't mean that you have to have this concrete black and white. I still think some of that defensiveness of feeling like we have to know exactly what we think and
Yeah.
believe, and we're so scared to, not sound right or have
Yeah.
confusion. And I think for a lot of that, we just go into that research mode of wanting it to be way more concrete than what it is.
Yeah,
So
and
just
it isn't.
remembering that you're getting this like beautiful toolbox.
Yeah.
And as you're even learning those tools, you're adapting so many skills. You're learning how to
Oh,
listen to
yeah.
opposite perspective. You're learning how to hear something that you didn't know about and reflecting on what it brings up in you. All of these processes are a part of the journey, and I
Yes.
think it's important within all of that. You're allowing yourself to learn, you're allowing yourself to grow. It's okay if some of the like outlets you end up choosing are some stuff you also let go of. I think a lot
Right.
for me, I could tell that my religion background spewed into stuff of me wanting, I wanted to learn every little bit of it and not miss
Mhm.
anything. And that was before I would even let myself kind of believe in it. Just
Yeah.
like so much obsessiveness around things. And it was because I was
Mm.
so scared to be wrong. I was so scared to
Yes.
question still. I
Same.
had to do like a secret service, like
Yeah.
investigation into everything. And then I
Yeah.
realized that's still coming from so many patterns of not
Right.
realizing that the journey of exploring through all of this has been the actual part that has mattered way more than the definites within, now what I kind of
Yeah.
subscribe to a little bit more now. And I'm also very open that every time I think I'm sure about something, a lot comes in. I am on a constant transformation journey. This is
Yes.
in my birth chart. And
Right.
I can't
Exactly.
rest. I can't rest. So,
Right,
yeah.
right. And that's so true. I've been learning that too, that it's like life really is truly always evolving. Always, always,
Mhm.
always. So what you think you know now, you don't know what you're talking about by tomorrow.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's the beauty. And I think when you're coming from, that's also kind of like you said, it's the remnant of religion, because religion, there everything is very black and white. It's this or it's that. It's right or it's wrong. It's up or it's down. And nature doesn't really work like that.
Nope.
There are certain things that just are, yes. And so it's this and it's that. But it's because nature's ultimate goal is just to survive, to just keep going. It will do whatever is necessary to keep going. It
Mm-hmm.
uses whatever it needs to just keep going. So the fire that was once used to completely wipe out something now becomes the thing that starts a whole new, ecosystem, because it's just about continuing to keep going. And when you're talking about religion, it really comes down to following the rules. So therefore, there has to be only this or that. But nothing in nature or the universe really works like that. You think of like here we have gravity and it works this way, but you go to a different planet and there's no gravity, or the gravity is way heavier, or whatever it is, in
Mm-hmm.
order for that planet, in order to survive and do what it needs to do. And even then, hundreds of years from now, that may completely change. There was a time where Mars was a very active planet. Now it's not
Mm-hmm.
so much, but it was incredibly active, had all these volcanoes happening at one point. Like it was explosive, which is why we relate it to explosive
Mm-hmm.
side of our birth chart. But now it's pretty silent. And so it changes, it evolves. And so that's the beauty of belief is, and that's one thing that I did as well. When I first left, I was trying to find the right, I first started to see if I could find another religion, and I just couldn't do that. And
Yeah.
then I tried to find the right spiritual practice. And I was like, am I going to be a Buddhist? Am I going to do the Baha'i
Mm-hmm.
faith? Am I going to do, like, I was trying to find something organized and something neat that I could say, like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And in
Mm-hmm.
all the years of searching and going to different temples, and I've moved around the country a lot. So I've gone to a lot of different um, practices and faiths and things like that. The one thing that I realized was every time I thought I knew something, I didn't, it would change, it would evolve. And that's when I started to recognize like this really is life school. So part of school is just that constant state of learning and
Yeah.
with what you know. And that's the beautiful part of it. It's the part of journeying through this, not getting straight to the
Yeah, and
destination.
you didn't waste your time in all those spaces,
No,
so
no.
much of that was either reflecting something deeper inside of you or
Mhm.
teaching you other perspective, and that is it. Yeah, the
Right,
learning.
that is it, and that's the
Yeah.
beauty, because I think that for me, it made me realize, like, I really, really love difference. I love difference, and I love diversity. I love just meeting and what's interesting is, like, especially when you're talking about, like, indigenous practices, or you're talking about nature, it's also tied. It's so much more, you'll find much more links amongst different indigenous practices across the world, whether it's African or whether it's
Mhm.
here in North America or in South America or in the Caribbean. And yet, obviously, when we're talking about those types of practices, it wasn't like back then they were on the internet being like, hey, what do you guys do when you want to connect to, Goddess Kali? You know what I mean? Like they're not
Mhm.
doing that. So yet the fact that even though they had no means to really get these types of things out there, these practices out there, and yet they all have very similar ways to connect to the other
Yeah.
side,
Yeah.
it made me realize like the difference is the beautiful part of it. It's this desire to connect with something else, and that we're all on this quest to find it. By in that finding, that's the beautiful part of it. That so you miss out so much when you just try to put yourself in one particular faith or in one particular religion. You miss out so much on the beauty that comes with exposing yourself to difference. It's
Yeah.
literally like, I look at it like astrology. Like Saturn is supposed to be Saturn. I wouldn't like it if like Mars was like, "Hey, I want to also be Saturn." It would ruin our entire galaxy. So like I need to say Mars and Saturn to say Saturn.
Yes. And yeah, I want to link that right into astrology because there's all these archetypes within all of the different signs and I think I think it's beautiful because astrology is kind of this big data collection and this spoken word and this
Mhm.
refinement that has happened through so many cultures, so many histories. It's like, you can get so nerdy and it's so beautiful.
Yes.
But I think the important part is, yeah, we're coloring in a lot of what things look like in so many
Yeah.
ways. And I think in astrology, you realize that we create this really cool puzzle piece. I was thinking of it when you were
Oh,
talking about nature and the fire. When you
yeah.
see that all the elements exist in us in different ways, that blueprint, that moment we take our first breath, just what was happening in the sky, kind of being this energetic blueprint for us, all
Mhm.
of these elements, like we fit each other so well. So
Yeah.
as unique, every single person's birth chart is its own. It's so unique and there's so much you can like look into within a birth chart, but it
Mhm.
also shows our connectivity together because
Yeah.
the people that are lacking fire in their birth chart, like then you get to go out and seek like this
Yeah.
balance and stuff outside of you. There's
Yeah.
charts that call for you to have this pairing, and then there's charts where you have like so many things going in so many different directions. And then just the way things fit within families, the way things fit within society, the way we have personal planets that are unique to us.
Yeah.
And then we have generational planets. All the biggest thing, I am so into astrology. I will continuously like love to learn from it. But I
Yeah.
think the big takeaway for me is the connectivity of all of us and how we need each other in so many ways to um yeah, it shows what we're all meant to be working through together, and it helps kind
Right.
of depersonalize things for me. But I
Mhm.
also loved it because of that very reason, that it's lumping us into something together, and we
Yeah.
all, I think, are starting to wake up to how much we need that sense of community and how to step into what our own intuitive strengths are, and we're making more space for that. But the astrology, even of the collective going on, the generational stuff that's happening right now,
Yeah.
it's so pointing to a rebirth, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
incredible. Yeah, share
Yeah,
some of
it
your
totally
astrology
is.
thoughts with us,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Lexi.
totally is. Because you think about it,
Yeah.
it's like, for those who are like, "What is personal and generational?" But it's like your personal planets are the planets that really influence your behavior. And so those would be like your sun, your moon, what sign was rising at the time of your birth, your Mercury, your Mars. But then when you start to get into like Neptune and Uranus, or wait, Uranus, because if you
Mhm.
say Uranus, then it sounds bad. But anyway, Uranus and then Pluto, these are the planets that will stay in a particular sign for like 10, 20
Yeah.
years sometimes. And so they influence an entire generation. Now, when you said the generation thing, I love that because it is so clear that we are totally moving towards a rebirth, having the fact that for millennials, most millennials have their Pluto and Scorpio. And so that Scorpio energy really is about bringing the death and the destruction in order for something else to be birthed. You know,
Revealing all
right,
secrets. No,
right,
nothing left unturned. We don't even care if you died. We're gonna bring up your secrets.
right. We're going to bring it out of the dark and we're going to bring it to light. That is Pluto and Scorpio. And if you
Yeah.
identify any millennial in your life, you know that that's very much generationally how we do things. And then you have that next generation, which Gen Z, they're really the Pluto and Sagittarius. And we see that in the fact that they're much more wild and they love colors and they're just like all about true self expression.
No
And at the
rules,
same
no
time,
butt singing. Yeah.
yeah, and not exactly, no one sing it. And at the same time, they still require a deep level of accountability because that is what the Sagittarius is all about. Sagittarius loves a good time, but also really loves higher learning and telling the truth. But now we
Mhm.
have these kids who Pluto is about to transition out of Capricorn now, and it's about to go into Aquarius. But
Yeah.
these kids that we have that were born now, they're born with Pluto and Capricorn. And the beautiful part about the Capricorn generation is they're all about it's an earth sign. It's about laying the foundation for something new. And
Mhm.
so they really, after we have gone through these experiences as the millennials and the Gen Zs, holding these people accountable, destroying the governments that have continued, including religion and things like that, that have
Yeah,
continued
so on
to
brand
hold us
for
back, right? Exactly,
Sagittarius,
right?
like, yeah.
Including that sort of thing. Now you have that Gen Alpha coming in, that Pluto and Capricorn generation that will come in to say, what is the new thing that we will start to create for safe spaces for our community? That's going to be kind of the work on the Gen Alpha generation. And I'm very excited to see how what they take from all of the generations before them and how they turn it, because the reason why things are in such a state of turmoil is just because we are in these very challenging placements, especially with Pluto, that impact when you're, especially when you're talking about religion and government. And that is also kind of ruled by Pluto. And interestingly enough, also a little bit of religion is controlled by Sagittarius. So
Yep.
there's no question
Yeah.
as to why are so many people leaving religion? Why are they questioning religion? Yes, because we are that Pluto and Scorpio, that Pluto and Sagittarius generation who was meant to tear down these things so the next generation can start to create and build something more whole, more beautiful, and safe for those to express themselves. So
Yeah,
I'm
and then
very
we got
interested in what
Pluto
turns
going
out.
into Aquarius, which
Yeah,
Aquarius
I
is,
really am very interested with the Pluto and
ooh,
Aquarius
it's gonna
generation.
be it's gonna be like every single uniqueness is, I feel like, finally gonna
Oh,
have like
yeah.
room to breathe. Like, and
Yes.
there's so
And, you
many
know,
things.
and Aquarius is
Yeah.
about community too. So I'm
Yeah.
interested to know, like, with Gen Alpha coming in and creating a new foundation, with the Pluto and Aquarius generation, I'm wondering with the uniqueness and the differences, how exactly they will also pull together for that purpose of community, because they care so much about that too. So I'm very interested to know, like, man, what is the world gonna look like? By that time we'll be really, really old. So
Yeah,
I
we're gonna be
hope
in our
we're
60s after
yeah,
this next Pluto transit. It's wild.
right.
Like,
So I'm interested to watch and see, like, what do they do, and how do they change the world with that, especially as it relates to religion and just organized groups when it comes to spiritual
yeah,
practices, you know?
we're not gonna be the same.
No, we're
Absolutely.
totally not. And I'm excited about it.
So fucking excited. I
Yeah.
love it. And yeah, just as a final thought, so I was
Yeah.
going to share too,
Mhm.
for me, having my birth chart and knowing some of the astrology, I really use it as a tool now, not to get like overly anxious and look into what's coming. It's more
Yeah.
of this like ability to co-create with the universe. I know what's going on above me in the
Mhm.
sky, and then I know how to like then get curious, like, oh, that's really beautiful. That is what, I'm writing what this energy looks like in so many ways. But it makes me just move through things with this like smile, even when it's
Yes.
really hard, because it gives me this ability to zoom out. And my
Oh
first
my
birth
God.
chart
Yeah.
reading had me in tears because
Yeah.
I just felt like it was so beautiful to see how you know, I already had done so much of what my birth charts like,
Yeah.
overall meaning was, but it
Yeah.
also showed that I was living exactly as I should. And I think just
Yes.
feeling that sense of release was
Yeah.
so beautiful. And then at that point, I realized we're all just these unique souls, and we can be so harsh on each other for our differences. But when you see
Yeah.
it as this like little puzzle piece to the soul, I think it's so sweet to know everyone's kind of figuring out their own little mystery of their relationship to body and soul, and we're all just here to like really just be curious about each other's stories. And so I would
Yeah.
love to hear for you just to share what the birth chart has done for you and just a few of the pointers around that too.
Yeah, honestly, it's very similar. When I first started, when I got my first birth chart, I was same. I was emotional. I was so like, oh my goodness, like this, I felt so seen and so validated. Like, I'm not crazy. So this is actually like, I
Mhm.
was supposed to operate like that. And it also helped me to validate a lot of the painful experiences that I
Yeah.
had. Because then once I started to see that it was in the chart, I was like, oh, okay. Okay. So there was something there for me to gain. And so that helped me to, especially around religion. I have actually a lot of like Sagittarius placements, and
Mm.
religion can be impacted by that. So I was definitely meant to like learn a lot of that. And then I have Chiron in my fifth house. And so that relates a lot to my childhood. And that explains a lot of the things that I
Lexi,
experienced.
I have Chiron on top of my moon. Isn't
Oh,
that not fair?
oh my, that is so, I'm so sorry, girl. I'm
I
so
know.
sorry.
I know. Every single thing that I feel has to be tied into this deep pain
Oh,
that I have to use to help, but it's so
but
everything is so deep,
oh my God. Oh
so
my
deep.
goodness, girl. My heart goes out to you. I have to like send you a fruit basket because
That's
that
a
is
journey.
I'm sending you prayers, girl, because that is tough. But that's where it's like you're like,
Yes.
yeah, the beauty is when you know that placement, it changes every difficulty that you have to
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
through because all of a sudden it's like, okay, what's the lesson here? How is this meant to serve me? How is this meant to heal me?
Yeah.
And that's something that definitely happened for me in having my birth chart. And originally when I first started like doing birth charts, I really lent myself to like, how can I use this to get stuff? And
Yeah.
that's the very Capricorn nature of me. So I was like, okay, how can I get stuff? And it works that way too. But I'm like you too, where I've started to evolve more into, I just want to understand,
Yeah.
and I really just want to work with the universe so that we now, like, for example, oh, this helps me so much a lot of times when I struggle with like, which I'm not saying that if you have mental health issues, do not get help because you still need to get help.
Yeah.
But there were times where, I really struggled with like depression. I struggle with depression and anxiety often, which many people are kind of shocked by, but I do. And I have really appreciated astrology in those moments, along with my meds. But I
Yeah.
appreciate astrology because I am able to look at like, oh, okay, wow, I'm really feeling like really empty right now. And then I'll see where the moon is and I'll see in relations to my chart, what is that activating? And then a lot of times when I'm going through those periods of a really down time, it is so tied and connected to my birth chart and the current
Yeah.
astrology.
Yeah.
And by having that, it empowers me because now instead of feeling like, oh, I'm hopeless. Like I'll never get out of this feeling. Cause we all know if you've been depressed, even if you've been depressed a million times and you
It
come
feels
out the
so
other side,
permanent. Yeah.
it feels so permanent every freaking time, you know? But astrology has helped me so much because when I'm in the lowest of low moments by myself and I'm having those dark nights that, you probably never tell anyone about, when I go and I open up my astrology programs and I look and I read and I see something, that validates my experience, it gives me so much peace to know that I'm going to be okay, that this is supposed to happen. And then I start asking that question, well, what is this here for? What is this here to teach me? Or sometimes it's just to allow me to feel something because so many times we are just racing through life that we never give ourselves time to grieve or
Yeah.
to wallow or to just feel without feeling like
And
with
we
no
have
agenda,
yeah, we have a terrible
and so
relationship to the shadow, like thinking
right,
that the shadow is then bad when
right,
sometimes the stars are wanting you to sit in a different energy just to
right,
learn to the more you learn how to sit with different energies in yourself, you can sit with
right,
different energies with people around you. It's a
right.
piece it. Yeah.
And that's also like even within yourself, it's like sometimes you're meant to feel something with no agenda other than to let it pass through you.
Yeah.
That's it. And the lesson is simply that. And if you are constantly looking at, and this is crazy coming from a Capricorn because I'm so goal oriented,
Mhm.
but I have learned that sometimes it's literally just about feeling the wave. That's it. And
Yep.
because of the fact that we have grown so accustomed to everything must serve some greater thing, sometimes we push past what needs to be felt and needs to be observed in order to go to something else that won't, quote unquote, waste our time.
Yeah.
When you are allowing yourself to let the moon, to let the retrogrades, to let, certain aspects really impact you. Essentially, what's happening is, for example, if you're talking about a Mercury in retrograde, that could be a time, depending on where it's placed and what it's impacting in your chart. It could be a time that Mercury itself is literally saying, I want to hold space for your communication. I want to hold space for the way you think and just let that be. and
Mhm.
without any judgment towards it, and allow it to come up. And when you let yourself feel that, a lot of times it's accepting what is, not with any purpose to get past it, to do this, but just accept what is. This is the way I think. This is the way I speak. This is the way I connect to people outside of me. And sometimes in doing that, that brings the healing that without doing causes such turmoil inside.
Yep.
So for me, that has been a huge benefit of astrology, is that it has given me the courage to sit with the uncomfortable emotions without fearing that if I sit in it too long, it means that I'll get lost. I now know that I'm like, no, the moon is only going to be here for 2.5 days. So what is this here to teach me?
Yeah.
Mercury is only going to be here for 3 weeks. So what am I here to get? What am I here to release? What am I here? You know what I'm saying?
So well said.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. It's so like
Yeah.
magical in the end.
I
It
love
really
it.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lexi, this talk has been absolutely incredible. I would love for you to share ways that our listeners can support you and find you on social media.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you guys just for tuning in and listening. And I really hope that you guys got a lot of good nuggets and just permission to feel your feelings and be yourself. And you can find me on Instagram and on TikTok at the Lexi Wilson. And that's TheLexie. Do not forget the E, Wilson. And yeah, I'm mainly there. I also have my website that I'm recreating right now, which is pretty awesome.
Woo!
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of return to blogging, and I really have been enjoying that. I have a lot of stuff going on in my writing house right now, so that probably is what's going on for me. But I've been really being called to write. So thelexiwilson.com is also where you can find videos and blogs and everything you need to work with me or to just stay in touch. And I am in San Diego, so find me on Instagram so that way you can come to the events that I go to, because I do readings locally now and I'm really loving
Woo!
doing that. Yeah, it's been so fun. So come on down to San Diego.
Oh, amazing, Lexi. Thank you for sharing your heart and thank you for sharing the vulnerable parts as well. Your
Yeah.
story is yeah, it's absolutely beautiful to hear like what you have turned your story into and taken both the shadow and the light and combined them so beautifully. I am so thankful for you and thanks to everyone for listening. We will see you next episode.
Bye.
Bye.